Hi, guys. So, yeah, my name's Brian. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Sanjay. And, guys, that worship was beautiful. Thank you. You really led us well. And, you know, it's just, it's so nice. It's not, I love it when worship's not a show and it's not a performance. It's about us all being led into the presence of Jesus together. So that's what worship lead is, and that's what they did brilliantly. So I just really touched, and after a really busy week, it was lovely to get in. I was at Hillsongs last night, and you guys were better. Oh, are you recording this? Sorry. I'm quite normal, by the way, and I do go off on tangents. And so, yeah, I was born in Northern Ireland. I am Irish. I moved, so my accent's a little bit weird, right? Because I left Ireland when I was about 9, and then I moved to Essex. So I basically grew up in Grays in Essex. It was quite funny coming from Ireland. Everybody took the mickey out of our accents, and we felt a little bit like outsiders. So basically, my two best friends, Bhupinder and Harjinder, we just hang out together. So they were Sikhs from a Sikh family, and there was us Irish boys against the world, you know. And so this was back in the early '80s. And so I grew up in Essex. My father was a pastor of a church. He was a Baptist minister, and he had been to Bible college, all of that. Grew up in a really strict home, so we didn't have a television until I was 14 because my dad thought it was the devil in the corner. We were never allowed to drink because if you drank, you were drinking the devil's vomit. If you smoked, you were sucking on the devil's finger. Do you know what I mean? So like it was really weird. It was very strict. Not that I, like as a child, ever wanted to drink or smoke. Sorry, that would be strange. And just so grew up in I remember like after our evening meal, my dad used to teach us New Testament Greek because I quote, he said, "One day it will come in helpful." You know, and so you would never invite your friends back for a meal just in case. Do you know what I mean? Because normally most kids after their evening meal watch EastEnders or go out and play football. We were doing New Testament Greek. So it was all a little bit strange as a child. And I didn't think it was strange. Only looking back and looking at other childhoods, I now realize it was strange. My mother sadly passed away when I was 11. She died of ovarian cancer. I didn't take that very well as a young Christian. It was very, very difficult to deal with. I battled with God until I was maybe about 16, 17. And then I chose the dark side and walked away from God. And I was at sixth form college. I got expelled. All that kind of stuff, and I ended up going to prison. I went to prison about 4 times for like theft, armed robbery, violent disorder. I could list them all. I have to list them sometimes on forums, you know. It's a bit embarrassing, really. Now that was when I was 18. Just so you're not scared of me. That was, and I'm like 45. Okay, I actually did a little hashtag on your Twitter thing, feeling old, this morning. So. That was a long time ago, and when I was in my 20s, I came back to God. I found him. I remember being in a probation hostel in Ipswich, and I found the Lord. I was reading Isaiah 59. It says in Isaiah 59, "Is the arm of the Lord so short that it cannot save?" And I had this picture of God's arm reaching in and saving, and it was that point I said, "I'll give my life to you." There's no situation you're involved in. There's no stuff that you're doing that God can't reach in and lift you out of. And, you know, so I was caught up in that whole kind of Essex culture of I basically wanted to be Ronnie Cray. Do you know what I mean? Or Reggie Cray. I can't remember which one was the more normal, actually. But I wanted to be one of those, you know, so it was all about, like, one day I want to own a BMW 7 Series and, you know, and a Rolex and, you know, and basically it was silly. You know, and I wanted to get rich without working. So that was the other problem, which then, yeah, was always a little bit, will lead to life in prison eventually, unless you're really good. I remember I had to go to Pentonville prison recently and talk about my experiences. And I am a rubbish criminal, was my talk, you know, because you don't end up in prison if you're good. You end up, you know what I mean? It was really bad. So actually, it all went wrong. I was in a room with about like 15 murderers, and we did a little worship session. They sang Amazing Grace. Because you have to sing songs that everybody knows. And so I was like really moved because, you know, I'd been in prison. I was thinking, oh, amazing grace. Isn't God full of grace? He saved me. And you know what I mean? I was wearing a lovely pink Lyle and Scott jumper. If that doesn't mean anything to any of you, it's fine. It was a nice jumper. And basically, I got up in front of this room of hardened criminals and I was thinking about the grace of God. I've got a pink jumper on. Just started to cry. It was like my opening line with like, and they're all thinking, oh, great, look at him. So, yeah, that was me. After I'll keep you awake, okay, this morning. I hear you've been up late, partying hard, getting told off by the people. It's always a good sign of a good weekend, isn't it? And so in my 20s, I gave my life to Jesus properly. There's that moment where I think we live off our parents' faith, where we grow up and it's just part of our culture and it's what we do. And we're here and we follow God because everybody follows God and that's just what we do. And it almost slips into being slightly nominal. It becomes the thing we do, and it's almost like our life insurance policy. It's tucked away. We don't really think about it very much, but we live this life because it's the life that we've been taught to live. It's not the life we've chosen to live. So there always comes that point for all of us where we have to choose to live the life. No matter how much of a Christian background we've grown up with, no matter how much that's part of our culture, there becomes this point of choice. So when I was 20, I chose. I said, I will give my life to you. And I remember God saying, for how long? And I said, I'll give you the rest of my life. I'll give you all my days. And that's what he's looking for. He's looking for people who will say, I will give you all my days. And so I gave him all my days. And they've been good days. They've been good days. They're not like, I still struggle and, do you know what I mean? I'm like normal people. I'm normal, so as normal as you can be, okay? Who really is normal? There's a book by a guy called John Ortberg. It says, everybody's normal until you get to know them, yeah? So I then became a youth worker at a church. I became the leader of that church. I was the senior pastor of a church in Norfolk. Hence, that's another little bit of my accent, right? So I'm getting these layers on my accent. So a little town called Diss in Norfolk. It's like rural as. Do you know what I mean? I crashed my car once, went in to report it on a Monday morning to a police station. You go in and you're reporting that you've crashed your car. So you expect it's Monday, it's busy, it's a police station. So I go to the front of the desk and I say, I've come. And he looked at me and, have you come about the goat? Oh, what do you mean? No, I've just crashed my car. So, we've been chasing a goat up and down the high street all morning. We've just caught it. We've kept it in one of the cells. We're trying to find who it belongs to. So that's the kind of, do you know what I mean? It's like rural as. It's like that was heavy urban crime right there. A goat running up and down the high street. One of our headlines in the local paper once was, chickens keeping people awake at night. My brother, who lived near these chickens, went out with a baseball bat one night. That's how that was like violence in the hood, with him trying to kill some chickens with a baseball bat. It was just the most stupid thing ever. You should get a gun if you're going to kill. But then that would really, anyway. I'm looking at my timer, just whizzing away here, and I'm just waffling on. No, here's the deal. A guy called Leonard Sweet years ago said that the future belongs to the storytellers and the connectors. So I'm here to tell stories. And I'm here to connect. And if we're going to connect with the world, we need to learn to tell stories and tell our story. And we need to learn to connect with people. So what you'll find with me, I'll tell little stories and I'll throw things in. Is that okay? And you'll just have to work out what's from God and what's just Brian rambling. Okay? And so I became the pastor of a church. I was the senior pastor, leading the church of about 200 people. We planted another church. And in the midst of that, I'm married. I have a beautiful wife called Tracy. I got married in 1992, so probably before some of you were born. A lot of you were born. And so I've been married quite a while. I've got two sons, Ellis and Dan. They're 19 and 17, and they think they know everything. And they keep me grounded, they take the mickey out of me, all the stuff that you're meant to do to your dad. Do you know what I mean? Just so that I don't think, oh, I'm special or anything like that. But I love them dearly. One of them's he's at UEA, University of East Anglia, doing international development studies, and Daniel, my younger son, wants to become a lawyer. So at least he's going the right way. I went prison. He wants to do law. Maybe if I'd have known him years ago, he could have helped me. But... and they're great. So leading this church, everything's going really well. And this is what happens, Sometimes you mustn't mistake that when everything's going well, that in Deuteronomy, God says to the children of Israel, when it goes well with you, don't forget about me. And sometimes life can just be good. and we can forget about God just because life is good. And somewhere in the midst of that, I was part of 24/7 prayer from the beginning, 15 years ago. Just so you know who I am, on an official capacity, I'm the National Director of 24/7 Prayer, and I am 24/7 Prayer's International Justice Director. So I have two jobs. One of those is to inspire and encourage prayer around the nation. The other one is to help justice organizations and to see justice rise up all around the world. And so I work with all sorts of different organizations. I find myself in some really strange places like the Department for International Development or the Home Office, or, just in, all over the show. It's kind of quite a strange life that I lead. But it's a good life. So that's what I do. And so I was around when 24/7 prayer began back in our church in Dis. We were praying 24/7. Since that began, we have seen over 12,000 24/7 prayer rooms in 120 countries in the last 15 years. God is really doing something in prayer, that we have realized that if we do not pray, we can have all the best ideas, we can have all the shiny lights, we can have all the best strategies, we can have all the best T-shirts and all the good stuff. But unless we pray, we're not going to see change. There's a guy called Arthur Wallace who said this: every great revival was born out of prayer, it is sustained by prayer, and it gives birth to prayer. That there's something about the church that prays that starts to see a difference. There's something about the person who prays that starts to see a difference. And so we need to be people of prayer, people who pray. And so 24/7 prayer somehow tapped into that. And we started to see a generation of 18 to 30-year-olds rise up in prayer. So I was just at the late end of that. I was 30. And now I'm too old to be part of 24/7 prayer. Not really. And so we started to see people meeting like you guys are doing, but doing it 24/7. That's for a whole week, 7 days, and just praying, just knocking on the doors of heaven. And we used to find that we couldn't get young people to come to prayer meetings, but we could somehow, if you said, will you come and pray for an hour at 3 o'clock in the morning, there was something different about that. And they'd be, yeah, I'll do that. It was almost like when we got a little bit edgier and a little bit more out there, that people started to connect in and tap in. So we created these creative places and spaces where people could pray. And so I'm leading the church, and we're seeing this thing grow. 24/7 prayer is growing all around the world. We've had prayer rooms on battleships. We've had prayer rooms in a brewery in Missouri. You couldn't make this stuff up. We've had prayer rooms in lots of strange places. And, we've seen untold prayer rooms in lots of places. In Zimbabwe, they couldn't pray in a room because they weren't allowed, so they prayed in a rock, round the rock at night. I wouldn't have wanted to be like the 3 o'clock in the morning walking around the rock. Do you know what I mean? But we had all this kind of stuff going on, and it's phenomenal. And in the midst of that, we started to realize that we sometimes are the answer to our own prayers. Sometimes you are the answer to your own prayers. God, would you make a difference in my town? Well, can you make a difference in your town? God, would you make a difference in my church? Can you make a difference in your church? These are some of the challenges that we have to face, that we become the answer to our own prayers. So we were very touched by what was happening in Ibiza. At the beginning of 2001, someone wrote in the national newspaper, Ibiza is Sodom and Gomorrah. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. And so we thought, well, if this is the darkest place there is, shouldn't Christians go there? Where are we called to shine? If we get in a really bright room and light a light, does that light make much difference? No. If we go into darkness and light a light, does that light make difference? Yes, it does. So we're called to go and shine our light in darkness. And so what we've just done as 24/7 prayer is look for dark places and go there. We're called to be light in darkness. So Tracy and I, we were praying. We were saying, God, everything's really good. It's all going on. We've got a great church, just planting another church. We have a 4-bedroom house, kids at school, lovely little town, Audi A4. Life's good. Generally good. God, and we're God's blessing. Not an Audi A4 means God's blessing you, but if you're into cars, it's a reasonable level. Okay, I'd rather if you're really blessed, you've got a Bugatti Veyron or something like that. That's like uber blessed. But you can't. I wouldn't buy one because you couldn't drive them in this country, could you? You couldn't really max them out, could you? Sorry, let's not do a Top Gear here, right? And in the midst of that, God spoke to us. And basically, he said, I want you to move to Ibiza. And we went, well, I can't dance. You know what I mean? I can't speak Spanish. Tracy can speak French, but that doesn't really help when you move to Spain. Speaking French just as useless. And so we were like, but God, and we did this little to and fro, and God really spoke to us. And we in 2005, we moved with our 2 sons to Ibiza to set up and start a work out there. I remember standing up in front of the church and saying, I'm resigning, we're leaving, we're going to go to be missionaries in Ibiza. And my wife went into her account, my wife's an accountant, she went into her account's office and said, I'm resigning, we're moving to Ibiza. And we did that in the December, we were moving in the March, and we'd managed to raise £35 a month worth of support. So we were like, yeah, this would be great. Do you know what I mean? This is going to really pave the way to like a villa in Spain, you know. And God was good. God was faithful. God was great. You know, sometimes I think we're always waiting for the conditions to be perfect before we move. You know, if you read Joshua, in Joshua chapter 1, it says that when the children of Israel went to cross the Jordan into the promised land, it says that the river was in flood. Let's look at that, shall we? It says this. Do you know what? I haven't got my glasses. Joshua chapter 3, verse 7. The Lord told Joshua, today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you just as I was with Moses. Give this command to the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps into the river and step there. And stop there. Sorry, that's my eyesight. Yeah. It was, and if you move on to verse 15, it was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above the point began backing up a great distance at a town called Adam. Now here's something fascinating, that the river was in flood. Now a flooded river isn't a good look to be walking across, you know. But what did they have to do? They had to step into the river. They had to move. And imagine the guys at the front carrying the ark, thinking, my goodness. And they put their feet into the water. And when they put their feet into the water, it stops flowing. And they cross. And I think sometimes, if they'd have just said, we're going to wait here on the edge of the bank until the water stops flowing, then we'll go. I don't know what God would have done. But there was this command for them to move. So that God always responds to movement. God is looking for people who will move, who will say, okay, I'll do it. And there's something in this, a divine thing that takes place. When we step out into him, he comes and he meets us and he moves with us. But if we're always waiting, we'll never do it. I've got 2 sons. If you wait until you can afford children, you'll never do it. Do you know what I mean? If you sat down and worked out the practical costs of what that's going to do to you over your lifetime, and I'm at the other end of it, and you just did the sums, and I'm married to an accountant, if you had added it all up, and you think, right, this is basically going to cost, this is going to ruin us financially. You know, for like the next 20 years, it's just going to ruin us unless, you know, and if we have more than one, we're just might as well just forget, like, you know, nice holidays or whatever. If you did all of that, you'd never have children. But and it's a bit like that. Sometimes I think we're always waiting. God, if you just make everything perfect, if you just line up everything perfect, then I will step out and I will do what you have called me to do. Make it all perfect. Whereas God is just saying, I need someone to move here. And so we moved to Ibiza. We stepped out and moved to Ibiza. And God responded. And so we moved. And God, just to challenge you guys, don't wait until the conditions are perfect before you move. And then we get to Ibiza, you see, and Ibiza is the most pubs, clubs and bars per square mile where we lived in the whole of Europe. You understand, there were live sex shows on the street, it was hedonism gone wild. It was like a Saturday night in Birmingham, but it was, I don't know if, yes, there are Saturday nights in Birmingham. You know where it's wild. Do you know what I mean? There are. Do you know what I mean? Where it's just wild out on the street, or Cardiff or wherever, you know, you see it on the TV. It's like one of those, but 169 of them, one after the other. You know, so it's just like, so in the morning they'd get up and they'd bleach the streets because it had that much urine and vomit on the streets from people getting drunk. And so it was really that messy. And so that's where we went, and we took our children, okay? big billboards with like topless women on, and you know what I mean? You don't want to be having to explain that to your 7-year-old, but you have to explain that to your 7-year-old. So we were confronted and forced to live in a way and live in a place that was very, very different to, have you come about the goat? But God was with us, and God will go with you when you step out. And we got there and we were interested in what could we do? How could we connect with this culture? Because what we've done in the past won't work in the future. You know, here's an interesting saying I once heard. If you always do what you've always done, you will always have what you always had. If you always do what you've always done, you will always have what you always had. And it's quite, you couldn't tweet that. It's too quick. It's too quick. But I should have brought some like sexy PowerPoints. And it's not even, or keynote sexy. I didn't mean like they were going to be like dancing PowerPoints. Like, how do you do a sexy PowerPoint? Anyway, that's a whole other, just, yeah. And so, how do we then engage in this way? Because what I've done as a church pastor and what I've done as a church leader isn't necessarily going to work in this environment. And there's this challenge really on all of us to look at how we engage with those around us. And how do we do it in a way that's different? You see, what happens quite often is this. If you look at 1 Samuel, verse 17, is that we start to have a heart and a passion for our generation. We start to have a heart and a passion to reach out to people and to see them touched. And you'll get the older leader will always say this. Verse, it's in sort of a blurry kind of verse, but I think it's like 38, more or less. Right? Then I'm reading from the New Living Translation, 1 Samuel 17, verse 38. David's going to go out and face Goliath here. Okay? And there's many giants in our culture, and he's a young man rising up to go and face Goliath. And this is what Saul says. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. And he said this, I can't go in these. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with the shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. And in many ways, we have to honor those that have gone before us, but we can't wear their armor. We can't wear their armor. And often people say, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to wear. If you're going to engage, you need to do it this way. Brian, you need to go and you need to set up a church service and you need to do it in a certain way. And you need to have a worship leader and you need to have this and you need to have that. And you need to wear my armor. And we have to find ways in which we defeat giants that are unique to us. Unique to us. You have giants in your culture that need bringing down. And you need to ask God, what is it that you want me to do? Because they're saying to me, I need to carry the shield and the sword. And really, I feel that I should be going with some stones and a sling. Do you get what I mean? And so we get to Ibiza, and Ibiza is an interesting place. I go and meet with the Spanish church leaders. Spanish church leaders are really lovely men. And that's the number one problem I have, right? I think men and women can lead. That's my own opinion, but I could back it up biblically, but we don't have a lot of time. Okay. The other thing is that the pastor is the priest. He's the number one man, and basically he does it all. And so he's like, this is how it has to happen. If you don't do it my way, then you're not really listening to God. And there's almost like this restraint that comes from a senior pastor on a younger guy like me. I was then, but now I'm. Anyway, so this kind of restraint comes, and he's saying you need to do it this way, and actually in the end you need to find a way that you can gracefully say, I feel we can do it another way, without actually dissing him, without knocking him. We need to honor our fathers, but they do need to realize that we're going to do it differently. And how do we do that? I think the best way to do it is to honor them, but, is to create a fourth lane. is to go, honor, do all that, but it's a bit more hard work, but to create this fourth lane, or third lane even. I'll tell you what I mean. In America, they wanted to do one of these highways where there was a special lane for if you took a passenger, a commuter lane. And what they did was there was a free-laned highway. So they shut one of the lanes down and made it a commuter lane. So that all the people who were driving on their own had 2 lanes, and everybody in the commuter lane had this third lane. And so everyone got really angry. It never worked. People threw stuff into the third lane because basically they had said this is wrong, and they'd shut down a lane. But in another state in America, instead of shutting down a lane, they opened a 4th lane. So eventually, all the people traveling in these 3 lanes, they start to look over and say, wow, those guys are traveling faster than us. Those guys are going further. And so rather than actually a desperate need to say all of this is wrong, and the way you're doing this is wrong, is to actually just bless it. It's great. You carry on. We're going to do a 4th lane. And eventually, they're old, they're wise, they look, they think, they see God, and they say, wow, they're traveling faster in that lane, and they look over. So my encouragement is always to create a 4th lane rather than go all anti and against the stuff that our forefathers have set up. So when we were in Ibiza, we honored the pastors. I went along, I preached at their churches, and we honored them. But we created a 4th lane. And we started to act differently. We walked the streets from midnight until 6 in the morning. Split. Say we were the team. It was a team of 12 of us, right, in the summer. And you lot would go out for 1 hour and walk the streets. You lot would pray. And then you'd come back, and you lot would go out, and you lot would pray. Does that make sense? Because here's what our Christian faith is like. It's like breathing in and breathing out. Breathe him in prayer, breathe him out in action. Breathe him in intimacy, breathe him out in involvement. That if we don't have both, it becomes ineffectual. It doesn't actually change much. If we're just out there trying to spread this Jesus virus to others, but we haven't caught it in the prayer room, then it doesn't really work. If we're just in the prayer room praying and we've caught the Jesus virus, but we're all quarantined from the world, it never spreads. But the best thing that happens is we catch the virus, we take it out. We catch the virus, we take it out. We transmit what we find in the prayer room. We transmit what we find in the place of intimacy and connectedness with God. We take that out into the world, and we shine it in darkness. And so that's kind of like where I don't think you can just say, you lot pray, I'll do the evangelism. No, I think we're all... Here's the deal. We all have our own Ibifas. We live in them. It doesn't take me long to realize that the world here in England is as dark as the world in Ibiza. It's just that Ibiza, it's in your face. Whereas here, it's a lot more subtle occasionally. And so even the idea of being a missionary, which is what people have said that Tracy and I were, we were missionaries in Ibiza, is true to one level. But we're all called to be missionaries because we're all placed in darkness. We're all called to shine. But we're all called to shine in darkness. And so, but it used to be, oh, you're only really a missionary if you go overseas and do mission work. And then if you can't go overseas and do mission work, you need to do something really meaningful, like become a nurse or a doctor, because then you're really making a difference in people's lives. But what about all those people who work in Topshop who need Jesus? When was someone called to be a missionary just to retail? I'm just going to go and hang out with a whole load of people in Burger King. If you work in Burger King, it's fine. It's not the preferred food restaurant of my choice. But you know what I mean? But actually, I don't go there anymore. It just feels wrong. Sometimes it feels really good, but afterwards it always feels, you know what I mean? Anyway, it's horrible. The other day I was at McDonald's and I thought, I was flying somewhere and I thought I'll have an egg and sausage McMuffin, or a bacon and sausage McMuffin. I was like, which one? Oh, I'll have them both. Anyway, that's how I got like this. Brian, what on earth were you talking about? Yeah, so there's this call that to be a missionary isn't just about going to Ibiza. We all have our own Ibizas. We all have the places where God has called us to shine. And we're shining. So don't negate your responsibility to be light in darkness. We're all called to be light in darkness wherever we are. How do we do that? Well, so we would walk the streets. We would go up. We would offer to pray with people. We would encourage people. We'd get alongside people. We'd take people home who got in a real mess. We ended up with a vomit van. That's what we called it. Well, Pete Gregg called it. My friend Pete called it that, and then it's just stuck. Not the vomit, the name. Sometimes the vomit did stick, especially if people had been eating cheese before they boked. Oh, dear me. And so, but hey, you know, you can't just look at, well, how we would just collect people, pick them up, clean them up, and take them back to their hotel. Because how often does God come to us as a God of grace when we're covered in our own mess, pick us up, clean us up, and take us home? I'll tell you how often, time and time again. No matter how many times you fail, no matter how many times you get it wrong, no matter how many times you drop the ball, God will always be there to pick you up and wash you down and take you home. And you need to know that. There's nothing that you have done that will keep you away from God. There's no way that you have been that will separate you from him. But there is nothing that can separate us from the love of Christ. Absolutely nothing. And therefore, we're called to be people who love others like Christ loved us. And if that means that there's someone lying in a pool of their own vomit and they need cleaning up and taking home, I can do that. I can do that. So, you know, that's what we did, because so often evangelism is like this program where we learn how to tell people the ABCs. I'll tell you what evangelism is right now. This is the Brian Heasley School of Evangelism. It involves prayer and it involves kindness. Be kind. At every opportunity, be kind. We do not live in a kind world. Be kind. Jesus was kind. It says in Romans 4, it is his kindness that leads us to repentance. His kindness. Yet so often we're known for the people who argue and the people who, but it's about kindness. So we would walk the street, we'd pick people up, we'd take them home, we'd pray for them, we'd have all sorts of wonderful encounters with people. And sometimes it'd be really, really messy, but sometimes it would be really, really beautiful. In the end, we started a little service on a Sunday night. I'll tell you why we started a service on a Sunday night, because we were working with about 15 West African prostitutes. And they said, no one will have us in church. So we started a service that they could come to. So I ended up running a church service for 15 working prostitutes. And some of them tithed. It's a strange world, isn't it? It's a world of grace. You know, we need to be, I don't have all the answers. And obviously I'm not advocating prostitution whatsoever. But when that woman broke the alabaster box over Jesus' feet, she was a prostitute. So how did she pay for that? How did she pay for that alabaster box? I'm just thinking out loud here, guys. Because so often it affects our sensibilities to be gracious. We have grace for certain types of people, but we're meant to have grace for everybody. Everybody. Sometimes in many ways it was easier to have grace for a trafficked prostitute than it is for the unemployed bloke across the street from me who I've just seen buy a new 50-inch plasma screen. I'm thinking, oh, what's he doing? Spending his dole check on television. You know what I mean? Or whatever. And so, but we're all just called to be gracious and have grace. So we ended up developing a thing called strip club chaplains, where strip club chaplains, I know. I wasn't one, right? It was a female job, basically. And because there was loads of strip clubs. So we just sent girls in twos, and they made brownies. And they just went in and said, here, we've brought you some brownies. And they just sat with the girls whilst they were putting their makeup before they went and worked as lap dancers and pole dancers. And they just talked to them. And they just loved them. And one day we had a girl who works in a strip club. And she wrote on her Facebook status after spending time with us. And it said, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And you realize you're getting somewhere? You see, Psalm 139 says this. It says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. When you were born, God smiled. God didn't screw up when he made you. If anyone got an iPad or anything like that, it says on the back, designed in California, assembled in China. They just don't want to put made in China on the back of their iPads. Can I just say, you were designed in heaven, assembled on earth. Designed in heaven, assembled on earth. So when we're working with prostitutes, we're not looking at prostitutes. I don't even really like calling them that. We used to call them Nigerian girls, even though they're from all different nationalities, just because it was just, it's a label. And we need to look at everybody. See, when it comes to evangelism, comes to reaching out, you need to look at everybody through the lens of Psalm 139. They are fearfully and wonderfully made. God didn't screw up when he made them. God didn't screw up when he made them. And so no girl's dream was when she was a child thinking, when I get older, I want to be a prostitute. Do you understand? That wasn't her dream. That wasn't what she wanted. So we ended up with this little service with lap dancers, prostitutes, some Spanish guys, some of our team, and my two sons. It was just like, this is the... And, you know, like, they'd come in, all the girls, all the African girls would come in, and they'd kiss them on... Because in Spain, you greet each other by kissing on both cheeks. They'd kiss all my sons on the cheeks. And I always remember saying to my eldest son, what are you doing, kissing prostitutes? Sorry, you have to lighten it sometimes. I know, do you know? It all gets so when we moved back to England, they went to church. It was like really middle-class, normal church. They were like, this is the weirdest church I've ever been to. So, and do you know what? That's how it should be. That this is the actually, you know, all our safe middle-class type church is like, this is the weirdest church. Shouldn't church be full of prostitutes and strippers? You know, sorry. But you know what I mean, don't you? You do not, please hear my heart, is that Jesus spent his time in darkness, you know, and we need to just live in the reality that Christ has called us to be a people who live in darkness. And if we're not careful, we can end up being, it says look at Romans chapter 12, it says this. I'm glad I've got it on my iPad because it's like big print. I really struggled with wearing glasses just because I don't like them. And if you wear glasses, that's great. I think you look brilliant, by the way. Anyone with glasses on? Wonderful. They're just not for me, although I'll have to accept that that's what happens. It says in Romans 12, 1-2, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And here, do you know what the pattern of this world is? X Factor. I know it's on the way out. I'm a bit more of a Strictly man myself. I'm man enough to admit that. I've got a friend, he's a dancer. Did any of you meet Christy, who came from 24/7 Prayer? His brother is a dancer, and he was on Strictly. So I watched it. I watched it, you know, because Ellis, and his name's the same name as my son. My son's called Ellis. And so I'm watching him on Strictly, and weirdly I got sucked in, and I found myself one Saturday night going, he's not pointing his toe enough. You know what I mean? I thought, oh no, Brian. So, but I'll tell you what happens with our like buttons and our favorite buttons and our little hearts that we put on Instagram, is that it's about judging. It's about judging. And when it says in James 2, verse 13, mercy triumphs over judgment, we've just got to be so careful that we don't get conformed to the pattern of this world. I'll tell you how that plays itself out in church, for instance. We go home and we say, didn't enjoy the worship this morning. I had someone come to me once and they said, I didn't get much out of the worship today. And I went, that's really, really good, because we weren't worshiping you. If we're not careful, we start to judge this stuff. We're not worshipping. You know, it's not about you, it's about God. So what if it's not your favorite song? My goodness, I bet if we went around the room and said, what is our favorite song, we'd get a whole load of different types of songs and a whole load of different types of styles of music. My two boys went to a Metallica concert at Reading. I wouldn't go anywhere near that. Do you know what I mean? I'm sort of a bit of a Mumford & Sons type of chap. Do you know what I mean? It's like banjos and things, you know. So, but we all have these different styles. If we start, and then we start to bring that into our church services, and we start to go home judging. Do you know what I mean? I do believe we need creativity in worship, but let's be really careful that we don't allow the pattern of this world to change us. And one of those is judging, and I think it creeps in. If it creeps into our worship, it creeps into so much more. So much more. And what we must not be known as is a judgmental people. There is one day a judge that you will meet, and you will be judged, and he will judge the living and the dead. And it's his job. Do you know what it's our job to do? Love, 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 love. There's said of John, the Apostle John, it said of him that they would bring him along on a stretcher. He was that old. And this old wise man who'd been with Jesus and all of that, and he was the only one, probably one of the only ones that didn't get martyred. And they'd bring him along on a stretcher, and they'd all be waiting for this really wise words that he was going to bring. He knew Jesus, all of that, you know, it was wonderful. And he just used to get up and go, love one another, love, Love one another. And then he'd lie back down again. And we need to learn not to judge. We need to learn. Here's the other thing. Now, I'm going to finish on these little 3 points, by the way. The other one is this, fear. We live in a health and safety world, don't we? You know, it really is a health and safety world. I think it's fine. If my son's going on a rock climbing holiday to Mallorca, I want someone to have done a little bit of health and safety. You know, with my 2 sons, they're very different. One of them, they do cliff jumping because they've been swimming all their lives. They can really swim. You know, because we lived in Ibiza, we had a swimming pool, blah, blah. It wasn't all vomit. Sometimes there were nice things. And so I've got one son, Ellis, the elder one, who has done physics and maths, A-level and all that, so further maths, that's like another language. He got A's in all of them. So if he's going to cliff jump, he will go down the bottom and check out there's nothing there, you know, so that it's all sensible. Daniel, my other son, if he's going to cliff jump, he'll just cliff jump. And so I like them to go cliff jumping together. Do you know what I mean? Because like Daniel will just jump. And I'll be like, Dan, for goodness sake, look. You know, one of our friends went, no, I can't tell you that. One of our friends, they jumped off such a high cliff. Anyone in the medical profession here? Yeah, could you put your hand up if you're in the medical? It was such a high cliff that when he hit the water, he gave himself colonic irrigation. It was horrendous. Basically, it went, oof, and it cleansed him. So you know, so they would do all this, but we live in this kind of health and safety. Someone will explain that later. We live in this. I'm not going to explain it. There will be no diagrams. And so there, but we do, don't we? And this is all about we become a little bit risk averse. Let's not take risks. You know, imagine if they'd been like that when Peter got out of the boat. Ooh, you know, can I just say something? If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. And we've got to be careful that we don't let fear run the show. And fear stop us from doing new things. What we did when we moved to Ibiza was like, what happens if it all goes wrong? And you know, basically, in the end, the only thing that we're having to deal with is our own sense of pride. That I have to go back and go, I got it wrong. Well, so what? People get it wrong all the time. Do you know what? If the Corinthians and the church in Ephesus and the church in Galatians, if they hadn't got things wrong, we wouldn't have those books in the Bible. Do you understand that they got stuff wrong and now we have learned from their mistakes? But they tried. And the fear culture will stop you from trying. God may be stirring in you the sense of, I want to do something new and I want to do something different. Don't let fear creep in and stop you. Because if you want to walk on water, you're going to have to get out of the boat. And if you do a risk assessment about walking on water, it will say it's impossible. But with God, all things are possible. All things are possible. And so there is a sense in which we must not, being conformed to the pattern of this world, don't fear. Fear is a big one. Has anyone ever watched Lord of the Rings? Yeah. King Theoden, as they're about to charge down on the Battle of Minas Tirith, he's like, he turns to them all and he says this, he goes, fear no darkness. Fear no darkness. I love that line. He was on the train a couple of years ago, the same train as me, and I saw him, and I wanted to get up and go, fear no darkness, but I stopped myself. Do you know what I mean? Because like he was just called Bernard Hill, and you know what I mean. It wasn't really King Theoden on the train; it was Bernard Hill. So you know, and it says in the Word, it says, "Greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world." If God is for us, who can be against us? We need to hang on to these scriptures. We really do. So if fear might stop you from stepping out, but fear, do you know what? Let's just boil this down to something practical. Say you've got that job in Topshop, and say your friend is suffering a little bit. Fear is what stops you from saying, do you mind if I pray with you? Not do you mind if I invite you to a meeting or alpha or try and evangelize you? Do you mind if I care for you enough that I will talk to the divine about you? And they might go, yeah, and you can say, should we do that now, or do you want me just to pray at home? You know, because some people get weirded out, you know, standing in Topshop praying for them. But, you know, we need to do these things, don't we? And that's where it begins. Fear no darkness. And finally, we get caught up in a whole world of consumerism. Spending. You know, it's advertising tells us we need all the new stuff. When really what God is looking for is for a people who will be generous and a people who will be sacrificial. So we needed to learn as we moved to Ibiza to be generous and sacrificial and to give of ourselves, give of our time, give of our money, give of our energy, in order that we would see the kingdom extended, where it's not about what I get, it's about what I give. It's about serving others. And as we served others, we had the joy of seeing people baptized, with the joy of praying with people on the street, with the joy of seeing people engage with the Word of God, with the joy of seeing a real sense of growth in Ibiza. And that became because we would not be conformed to the pattern of this world. You know, we won't judge, we won't fear, and we won't just consume. We will show mercy, we will be brave, and we will give. And I just want to say to you today, if you want to live that way, it's an adventure that's worth going on. Helen Keller said this. She said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. I don't want to be a pew filler. I don't just want to go along to church. I want to see his kingdom come. I want to see that come in the hospital that I work in, the school that I work in, the office that I work in, the community that I'm part of. I want to see his kingdom come. And that becomes real whenever we hit the deck with him, become intimate with him, become prayerful with him, and decide we're going to live differently. We're going to live differently. That's my heart. It's not what I was going to say, but it's my heart. As I sat and listened to you worship this morning, I just felt that's what God wanted to say.